Welcome back to How Soccer Explains Leadership. This is Phil Dark. I'm your host for this show. This isn't your first time. Hopefully you've listened to a lot of our episodes, but if it is your first time, welcome. Look forward to hearing back from you, what you're learning. Everyone listening, I really look forward to hearing you engaging this conversation, not just listening in, but being a part of it. So with that, if you haven't done so already, join a Facebook group that we have. You can click that link in the show notes if you haven't joined that already. If you have, you know that we do have conversation there. Great place to let us know any guests that you have that you might want to introduce to us so that we can get them on this show. Also, rate and review the show if you haven't done so already. But again, great guest we have again today, as usual. I've learned from this guy already. We've met a few weeks ago because he also does a podcast. He is the trainer of High Five Adventure Learning Center and host of the Vertical Playpen Podcast. His name is Phil Brown. He is from the UK, England, Ipswich, England, to be specific. But Phil, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Phil.
Absolutely. You're going to have a lot of Phil today. So
Yeah.
folks, get ready for it. Get ready for it. Not surprising to you to really, I'm guessing that not a lot of people know who you are listening to this. If they do, I'm glad about that because, you're a pretty cool guy who's got a lot of good things to learn from. I know I have already. But can you just share, as we get started, just share your story a little bit about what you do, your podcast, how you develop your passion for soccer and leadership.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Originally, I'm from a town called Ipswich. Soccer fans out there, Ipswich Town Football Club is the team that I support. They're currently, unfortunately, in League One, and they're having a rough go of things. But that's where I'm originally from. Uh, I looked at trying to become a teacher, an English teacher. That's where my vocation was heading. That's where my career was heading. And I, at one stage during college, found out that I could work at a summer camp in the States. And so I thought, well, this could be good for me. This could be a way that I could add stuff to the resume of saying I worked with kids from a different population, different countries. That'll help. And then I entered into this world of working with youth and adults in team development stuff just through that summer camp experience. They had a challenge course, a ropes course, and I was introduced to that world and realized that, wow, this is so much more fun teaching kids how to be better human beings and better leaders and better participants in their community than it was to try to teach Shakespeare. And what I was able to do is take all of my training in the education world and bring that to doing team development work. And I was very, very fortunate that the camp that I ended up in New York State ended up having an outdoor education program year round. So they sponsored me to extend my visa, and then from that point, I grew into this position, which I ended up creating at the organization, um, called the Challenge Course Coordinator or Team Development Coordinator. And I ended up being sent to High Five to do my formal training. They do training around challenge course operation, but also team and leadership development facilitation. So I was able to go to many trainings, and that was how I found out actually this is a career. I had no idea that I could work in this field in the UK. Possibly it is a career. I still do not know. But here, I was able to fall into this outdoor ed world, and I was very, very fortunate to do so. Had lots of training along the way, and then myself and my wife, we met at the summer camp, we worked at the summer camp, we lived at the summer camp, we got married at the summer camp. Very summer camp devotees. Decided we needed to grow. We wanted to grow our family, and we couldn't stay in that world for that much longer. And a job opened up at High Five as a trainer, and I jumped on the chance to work at an org that meant a lot to me and was doing great stuff with communities all around the northeast of the US. And now I've been there coming up on 6 years. So it's been very fortuitous how I ended up finding my way here. In terms of the podcast, I realized that when I was in starting out in this industry of adventure and experiential education, that's what we're umbrella termed in, I had no idea it existed. I had no idea it existed when I was in England. I had no idea it existed even when I came to the States. And I was like, what is this? You can go to colleges and get degrees in this. I had no idea you could do that. And so the point of the podcast was I wanted there to be an avenue, a way for us to spread the word of experiential and adventure education. Since I had no idea it existed, no doubt other people don't know it exists. People listen to this may be like, "What? This is a thing he does for a living." So we created the podcast. Originally, it was just myself and some of the staff at High Five talking about how we started at High Five, and then realized that people were interested, and we got listeners, and people were asking questions and submitting questions. And now it's become, we've been doing it for 2 years, and yeah, it's got a good listener base, and welcome other people to jump in and take a listen to some of the episodes. I interviewed a bunch of people. I interviewed Phil, who's host of this podcast for it. And I'm realizing that so many people are connected to experiential education, which essentially, in its very, very basic term, is learning from your experiences. Wow, that you've probably everyone, right, as they learn from their experiences. So, but there is studies, there are journal articles, there is people that do this for a career and teach this. And I just get passionate and excited about the idea of making better human beings, but also being able to introduce people to this idea that they already probably are aware of. Sort of relate it sometimes to a comedian who goes up on stage and says obvious jokes, and everyone's like, wow, it's so relatable. That's kind of how the industry feels like to me. Once people realize it, they realize, wow, I've probably done that. You think of a very simple description, simple example would be like you're walking down as a kid, you're walking and you trip over something like a root on the ground. If you're outside, you realize now you probably should keep your feet up. That in itself is experiential learning. You did something, you had something happen to you, and you had a learning outcome afterwards, and that cultivates and shapes the way you continue life. So it's an exciting thing. In terms of soccer, I've referenced this in another conversation with Phil, that, and people are probably aware of this, in England it's pretty much our only sport. There are a few, but you're raised on soccer, you're raised on football. It's a part of your being. In nearly every single town, or at least very close by, has a stadium and a team of their own. In the town I'm from, Ipswich would be considered a city in the States. I think it's somewhere like 350,000 people there. So it's a big area, and it has a soccer team, and you're raised and you support them. And I also know that Norwich City, who's an hour north of us, are arch rivals. It's a component of your livelihood. So you just don't know anything other than that. And so trying to separate those things is challenging for me, because I think that's just a part of growing up. When I came to the States, and I've been here now since 2007, 8, around there, so 2008, that it wasn't really publicized in the way it is now. It wasn't on the TV. It wasn't as seen. And I'm so thankful that NBC and NBCSN have started showing some of the games, and now I can watch a lot of the Premier League games. And so I'm immersed back in it. And so that's really exciting.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because if you're here in the US listening to this and you've never been to England to experience football in England, it's nothing like anything we have in the US. It just really isn't. We can talk about the Oakland Raiders when they were in Oakland as well, they're rabid fans, but you don't know what you're talking about till like you said, it's just who you are. And the thought of you being in and from Ipswich and not being a supporter of Ipswich is just crazy. Like, you just wouldn't see it, right?
Oh yeah, no. If you saw anyone wearing any other jersey, it'd be like,
yeah,
what is the tourist doing here?
right.
Clearly, the tourist.
Yeah, and especially here, I'm out in California. So California, it's like it's a free for all of who you support, and that's something that's really cool. But I, we're not going to focus on that. But that is something, like you said, it's just part of who you are. It's like, it's just part of your blood. You are a football supporter. You are an Ipswich supporter, and you've been learning from the game your whole life, which is really cool. A few episodes ago, we had Mark Peace. If you haven't listened to that episode, I strongly encourage you to do so. It's about his experience. He's a pastor, yes, but he's also a lifelong Leeds supporter. And he talked about Marco Bielsa and the impact he has had, not just on that team and club, but on the community, and the leadership lessons we can learn from that. But the other thing that's really cool about you and what you do is, as you said, it's experiential learning. And, folks, if there's one thing I want you to learn from this podcast, and one of the reasons I started it is to learn from your experiences, learn from your experience in the game of football, but also learn from, learn interdisciplinary, like have interdisciplinary learning. So as you know, I don't know exactly when this is going to air, but we're going to have a guy that I'm going to interview soon who's a field hockey referee. I'm going to have, and we're going to learn from him. He also has written a book on baseball, right? And he was a USA Today journalist. So these are things like we can learn from other disciplines. Hopefully we have people listening in who are businessmen and women in your parenting, in your marriage. These are things that we can take these principles as you do with the adventure sports, through ropes courses, through mountain biking, through whatever, whitewater rafting, right? Like we can learn life lessons from these things. And so anyway, so if I say that, hopefully I don't have to make the connection. Hopefully, we can, especially as we do more of this, you can see that there is a method to the madness. But I believe that what you do is exactly what we're talking about doing on this show. What we hope to encourage people to do is literally in every area of your life to think about, okay, here's a lesson. How can I apply this to other areas of my life? How can I really use this? So with that, how do you use the lessons you've learned from football in your country, right? Now you're in the US, so we'll use soccer for the purposes of this interview, just because we are an American podcast. But you know what I'm talking about if I slip into football. But you learn from soccer and your leadership and in your training development work that you do today.
Yeah, I would say, the great thing I think about soccer in terms of the difference between that and other sports is that there there doesn't necessarily have to be these individualized people on the team who create the winning structure of the team. It's much more focused on a collective community, and I think that that's something that in England they also have in a big way as well, is because that team is a part of the community, in the community, so in structured around the team, that you do have that connection formed with the players and the staff. To have the insignia of your team on your badge and say that you work for them, they work for you. It has this kind of feel of symbioticness that I don't sometimes sense from teams in this country and other sports, where it's more fan based idolization of people. It's more a community, everyone on the same level. I think that where this like sort of like leads into the work that I do, we have a product. We also create team development products, and one of the products we create is a deck of cards called Ubuntu. People can't see that, but it's sitting right behind me. But it's Ubuntu, Ubuntu, and the essential phrase of it, what that means, it's part of the Bantu dialect in Africa, and it essentially breaks down to be I am because we are. I am because we are, which talks about that sense of community. It was coined very famously by Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Desmond Tutu to talk about around apartheid, about the community of South Africa getting together to work together to raise the bar of what was going on there. And that had to come from every component. It's not an individual. It doesn't require an individual. It requires all people. So we utilize this deck of cards, which you can find on our website, but there's a lot of activities that go with this. But we use that phrasing of Ubuntu to represent that we're all part of the exact same team, no bigger than anyone else. And I think that that's something that I know in soccer teams, is that when, let's say, a captain comes up and talks about the team, or a coach comes up and talks about the team post game, they might highlight individuals, but really they're talking about the larger component of the team. How was the quality of the team's morale? How was their energy? What was their fight like? What was their drive? Rather than say, this person saved us. Because, and even when you see journalists ask that question of them, they often recoil back and say, well, actually, it's a team effort. And I think that that really sums up what I think that soccer brings, that I think other teams could learn from, other sports could also learn from, that this mindset. Um, Going back to Ubuntu, in relevance to American sports, the Boston Celtics basketball team in this area, when they were coached by Doc Rivers, they used to put their hands in the middle and chant before every game, and that word that they would chant would be Ubuntu. So going back to this idea, they were trying to get to this mindset that we're all component of this team. We're not a product of an individual, we're a product of the whole team. And I think that that's something that we continuously work on when we're doing leadership development, be that with youth programming, with adult corporate groups, with sports teams. High Five does work with NHL teams. So we do professional sports, but mainly in the hockey area of sport. But whenever we're working with any of these teams, we're always talking about the connection of the team. In experiential education, there's a term that gets used, I think sometimes banded around too often, but it's connection before content. And it essentially means that we should be focusing on how connected people are before we ever get into the nitty gritty detail stuff, rather than talking about like, oh, we don't trust each other or we're not communicating, all those things. Forget that for a moment and let's just focus on, are you connected? Because you're more likely to be able to have good conversations and important conversations with people that you're connected with than people you don't know. So that connection is key. And so when you end up having that connection, you sort of get rid of you cut away from the ego of the individual, and you start realizing that we're all a part of the team. And so that's something that I would say we consistently use at High Five in terms of our leadership development stuff, which I think is a good parallel between soccer leadership, because I think that it doesn't often come necessarily from individuals. It comes from the group working together. And I would even say as well, I think that soccer coaches are more facilitators. And that's a term that we often use in our industry to talk about what we do. Facilitation meaning to make easy. That those coaches facilitate the growth of their team rather than, once again, ordering people around and telling them what you need to do. And often those people, you talked about Bielsa as an example of a coach that does that well. If you've ever watched a Leeds game, you'll know he sits on his little Bielsa bucket, but he's very silent. You don't get him animated on the sidelines yelling at the team, because what he's done is he's cultivated, his team knows what to do, and he can sit back and he can then observe and then he can watch, and he gives and empowers the team members to make the decisions for themselves. So that's lots of different components. I think that there are parallels and great lessons from watching teams operate that can be brought into any kind of environment.
Yeah, you said a couple things there. The first is, I'll hit the last thing you said first, which is great leaders really cultivate that environment that everyone can flourish in, right?
Mhm.
So that it's not so much you're telling people what to do. No, you're cultivating this environment for them to grow. You're basically a gardener to be able to till that soil so that these different plants, these different types of people can all flourish within this garden, so to speak. And so that's what a great coach will do in a great team. The other thing you talked about there really is the idea of the soccer being a weak league sport, right? So Malcolm Gladwell had a great podcast on this talking about basketball being a strong link sport, meaning that a great player can take over a game. Look at LeBron James, for example. He can take over a game even if he's the only dude on the team who's a rock star, so to speak. But if you have that one rock star on a soccer team, it's not going to, you have one Messi and he's playing with a bunch of players who can't play. Those other players will be exposed. Your weakest link will be exposed by another great team or another really good team for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing with that is to have this team, because it's a weak link sport, you not only need to have strong links, but you need to be connected. You need to be one unit. And the only way that's going to happen is by actually having that leader cultivating that environment, but also having players that believe in that and that are actually seeing it as we are a team. We love each other. We care about each other. And for that culture to spread into the community, I think of one of my old coaches. He played for West Ham United, and we're going to have him on the show at some point in the future. Clyde Best is his name, and he was an amazing player for West Ham back in the 70s. And in the 90s, early 90s, I called him and said, hey, I'm going to be over in London. Any chance you can get me tickets? He says, oh, yeah, let me call up my old friends. Well, his old friends ran the pub across the street from the stadium, and they were just, the team would go there after the game, right? And so they were hanging out. And these are guys that he still keeps in touch with. They were buddies. I just assumed they were old players. And I talked to him the other day, and I said, were those old players with you? Like, and he says, no, they were just my friends. They own the pub. We would all go there and hang out. So that idea is just so foreign. The thought of a team going after the game here in the US to the pub across the street or the bar across the street is just crazy talk. They'd be mobbed, right? And so that's something that is, again, that's just kind of a cool little thing. I don't know the life lesson with that, except to say, if we as organizational leaders can bring our customer base, to bring our people, to bring our team into a feeling of, like you said, family, into a feeling of we are one, we are part of this, how much stronger is that? So what are your thoughts on all that stuff?
Yeah, I think that, something that struck into my head though was the sense of that community, that they're connected with the people that are in the pub and that kind of stuff. I think that something that England has, or soccer has, that I think is really helpful, is that they have this academy grassroots system where they're really bringing in, cultivating kids from a younger age who are homegrown in that area. So I went to a high school and I had friends who got into the academy team. And then you see them grow, and sometimes they make it, sometimes they don't. But a lot of times you'll get these players that end up playing for the teams who were actually a part of the community to begin with. So you can sense there's a huge amount of investment from the local community around seeing an individual who come from them. Rather than, I think that sometimes, the States is an issue with size, to be honest. It's so big. And so you can't really have the connection as much to the players as you would like to have. But you can see in England that you can have this real deep connection with people who are really connected to the team and the coaching staff and other individuals. I was interviewing a guy who's actually from my hometown, and he said when he was growing up, he would walk down the street and he'd walk past Bobby Robson. Now, Bobby Robson was the coach of Ipswich back in our heyday when we were great. He was also the coach of the national team, England team, when they were doing so wonderfully well as well. So he would walk down the street and he would say, hey, Mr. Robson, and Bobby Robson would say, hey, Andrew, like he'd know the name. Like there wasn't this big, like, we rush to get autographs and security and all of that kind of sense of isolation, I think, that creates from that. As an example, I've worked with a couple of NHL teams, and whenever we've worked with those teams, we sign NDAs, we have to hand over like cell phones, we have to have security represented, we have to keep the location of where we're going secret. That's an odd thing, really, when you really analyze it. Like the individuals, the players. I remember we were in one hotel, and it was a shared hotel, and there were other people in the hotel. We'd have to sneak them out the back. They've had their hoods up. And I think, like, what a life that must be, to lead that life. But when you're unable to really have that deep connection to the community, there's something lost there. I would assume. And there, how do you cultivate that passion when you don't have that deep connection? We go back to the connection piece. But
That's interesting. I don't know why it made me think of, actually, I do know why, because it's a similar idea. This idea of the celebrity culture in the US, I think, really throws us for a loop. I was actually just talking to somebody about it this morning, about our platform, right? How much talk do we have of platform building in our world, right? It's in the US, really. I don't know how big it is over in Europe, but how many followers do you have? How many friends do you have on Facebook? How many, even the words that are used are relational words, right? They're leadership words, but they're not really, you're not leading necessarily. You're just a quote unquote influencer. But the reality is, like, what is your real platform? Your real platform are the people that you know and love, and that know and love you. I mean, like, you're really, really impacting deeply into their lives. You may be a nugget of something that they remember, but the reality is, people that if you're on this podcast, you're going to learn some stuff from this. But if I've disappeared for 6 months, you wouldn't really miss me, I don't think. Hopefully you have people in your life that if they were to disappear for even 3 days, you'd say, what's going on with them? How are they really doing? That's really your your true platform at the end of the day. But we've established this celebrity culture where if a hockey player on the Boston Bruins says something, we go, ooh, I must listen to that, right? Where LeBron James is now a political figure. Why? He's a great basketball player. But, why would we listen to him on these very, very important global issues? And so, like you said, they need protection. They need all this other stuff because we have the celebrity culture, because we put them on a pedestal. Contrast that to what you talked about made me think of. I was in The Hague with one of my really good friends, and we were walking around, and he points over to this guy riding a bike. He goes, "That's the prime minister." And he was riding a bike because he rides his bike to work. And he
Yeah.
locks his bike outside the government building, and he walks in, and it's just the prime minister. It's no big deal. No big, huge entourage, no secret service, no anything. And you go, what are we missing? Right. I mean, like from a leadership perspective, you go, are you putting yourself on a pedestal as the leader? Or are you truly seeing yourself as a gardener who is a servant leader who is cultivating the flourishing of those around you? And I think it's really hard to be both.
Oh, those are almost polar opposite. And I think that most of the, if I talk to most people who work in leadership development world, and I immerse myself in that world quite often when I'm traveling around conferences, most of the time we're teaching skills that are more servant leader oriented. We're not talking about those other things and saying those are things that we should be aiming for. We don't teach you have to be the loudest in the room. Like you have to be the brightest star in the sky. We're not saying that stuff. Very often we're talking about the concept of being a servant, facilitating other people's growth. I've worked for people that have really cultivated me, and I've deeply respected them. And at the same time, I've worked with people who have ordered me around, and I know how I feel about that.
Right.
Right. Like, so there's the notion of like, if I know as an employee that that's how I feel, why would I want to aspire to be that when I get to a stage of leadership? And that's, yeah, I would say most people in our sphere are not teaching the one, but definitely focused on the other, which is like, how can we serve the community that we work with, and how can we cultivate the people around us to be able to grow? And that's what I think that you see in really successful soccer teams. I think you can tell a really great coach by the way that the players speak about them. So just a slight difference in the terminology. If someone says the coach versus saying my coach,
Mm.
very different. But listen to them talk about their coach or whoever it is, and if they say our coach or my coach, they use some kind of ownership over it. Then you can tell that they respect them. If they say the coach, they don't really respect them. They just know that person has a title. And so when I'm thinking about trying to cultivate leaders, I want people to realize that you want to get to a point where you are a part of them, that you're not telling them what to do. You're not above them. The pyramid should flip, and the totem pole should flip, or whatever you want to phrase it. It should be a point where you're referred to as their leader rather than the leader. Right? I think that slight distinction difference is very interesting when you talk to people. And I found that the case when I've interviewed people who worked, if I'm going into work of a corporate group and I want to get a scale of what's going on in the department that I'm working with, I might ask them questions that will sort of lead that in. And they won't know I'm doing that, but I said a little bit of detective work on my end, because if the leader's in the room when I'm trying to have a discussion, they're not going to be honest. So I want them to have a little bit more honesty about stuff. So just those small things about the way that they term, they'll give you information. And the difference between thee and my is very striking, I found.
It's massive. I mean, it's everything, right? And that goes to, I think that a lot of that goes to personality of the coaches. It goes to task focused versus people focused. It goes to the culture. It goes to, are you a servant leader, or have you learned to be a transactional leader, right? That just transactional leader versus relational leader. Joe Ehrman in Inside Out Coaching talks about that very deeply. It's a great book on that. But what you find, I think, is a lot of coaches think we need to be transactional because this is a results based business, right? And even I saw Alex Ferguson talk about that, the other day, talking about, with Solskjaer. Well, hey, it's a results based business at the end of the day, but you're going to get the best results when you are a leader they want to play for, when you are the relational leader. So yes, it can be a both and it needs to be a both and. I think for long-term success, because I think you put that up against a Mourinho, for instance. I don't think anyone would accuse Mourinho about being a relational leader, right? He's very much a transactional leader. So what does he get? He gets short-term results.
Mm-hmm.
And, 2-3 years, virtually every club he's been a part of has imploded. And it's because I think, in my completely uneducated view, and if Jose, you want to come on the show and tell me I'm wrong, I'd love to have that conversation, because I do want to know the method behind the madness. But, to say, that he is not cultivating an environment for all of his players to flourish. I think some of the players flourish and some completely implode or explode, right? And because of that, the locker room is a mess. Versus what I saw just the other day, and it's interesting because you don't hear about a lot of this, you don't see a lot of this, but with Solskjaer on Man United, he said in a quote I just saw, talking about how he has one-on-one conversation with his players to really see how they're doing personally, how their marriage is going, how their kids are doing, how they're doing. And, to really, he says, we walk, if they're struggling to get in the team, we have these conversations one-on-one. That's a totally different approach from a relational focus. That takes a lot of time, energy, effort that isn't X's and O's. And I think that's a great leadership lesson all around the room.
And I think that you have to build that into your normal work to work day. Don't assume that these are additional parts. Like if you're a leader, these are crucial steps. These aren't like parts that you add in if you have time, or I didn't have time to do that. I didn't have time to do that. No, that should be a part of your day to day. Because the last time we spoke, Phil, I remember us saying like, Man United were having a rough go at it. So congrats at the moment, you're number one. So it's like,
we're milking on it. We're milking it right now. Just,
don't jinx it. But we also talked about how Paul Pogba, really he was disappearing. He's just all about himself. Mm-hmm. What change he's made in the last few weeks. And I think that in every discussion I've seen, it's been exactly what you've suggested. It's been relation focused. Actually, Solskjaer is actually talking to him, actually having conversations with him and learning about his players. And that does take time. It's also not a quick fix. Mm-hmm. I'm not a massive fan of the coaches in and coaches out after like 3 months because they didn't win. It's like, give them some time to build the relationship a little bit. Give them some time. But as an example of like spending the time, our executive director at our org, when we were back in our offices, he would purposely every single morning, the first hour of his day was spent going office to office and saying, how are you? Just checking in every day. Now, sometimes you were like, oh God, he's coming quick. I was trying to have a meeting or something. You were trying to do something. But from a perspective of knowing that your leader has your back and really cares about you, he knew every single thing about all of his employees' life and everything, like when my daughter turned 5, he sent me a text. He's not on social media. He just knows those things, or he's written them down somewhere, or he's taken the extra step to learn. I would go above and beyond for him because he's gone above and beyond for me in these moments, and it's taken maybe an hour out of his day. But when I'm talking to leaders and teaching them about this stuff, I was with a corporate group and we were doing a session on communication. We throw in activities. That's how we use stuff. We use activities as an example or of rather real life scenario and try to make it entertaining. But they were saying at the end, wow, Phil, that was so much fun. I wish we could do this more often. And I just said, why can't you? Like, is there a reason you can't? Now, granted, I'm just facilitating some things you can't do, but spending the time to connect. As an example, we're sort of not doing this as well with the Zoom. Zoom is great, right? Because we can have lots of interactions with lots of people. But how often do you actually schedule a meeting just to chat, not to have have an agenda? Like we're seeing each other a lot, but we're always focused on an agenda. So spending the time out of your day just to connect. At our organization, what we do is we do coffee partners, and every single week we get assigned a different staff member who's going to be our coffee partner. And once or twice a week, we have coffee with them virtually. And it's planned. It's planned and it's intentional so that that it's part of work. I'm putting air quotes there, but you don't feel like you're skipping out on something. It's an intentional part of the workday, just like it's an intentional part of, I think, a leader's job to really cultivate connection with the people they work with.
Yeah, that's just so good. I can't emphasize that enough, folks. If again, that last little bit there, just talking about connection first, right? And that goes to really the way you guys train leadership. Going back to what we talked about early on, just you with the, with high five and really you guys have 3 things: connect, empower, lead, that are the focus of what you teach and train. And it doesn't say lead, connect, empower, or, empower, connect, lead. It's connect first, right? But can you just speak to the other 2 and what that looks like as you're training? Obviously in a nutshell, we don't have the time for the full training, but And we'll get all the information on the show notes as far as how to connect with you and be able to learn more about High Five. But can you just give that nutshell, and then really how it applies to what we're talking about here?
Yeah. So in terms of that's like essentially our umbrella term. It fits into every department for us, Connect, Empower, Lead. We try to focus everything we can around that. There's also an additional part after the lead, which is be the example, which I think is another important role model component to it as well. But how do we represent ourselves? But if I take it into the terms when we're working with sports teams, the first thing obviously is focusing on the connection. The next is to really empower the team to make the decisions about how things flow. What I really love this is an analogy that was shared with me recently, that as a facilitator, a team development, leadership development facilitator, this is my essential job. I climb into the bus, I turn the engine off, and then get off the bus, let all the players go onto the bus. They determine where they're going, who's steering, what speed they're going at, their destination, every component of. All I do is turn the engine on. So that's that empowerment piece. There's a phrase that TED Talks, sage on the stage, right? Like this person is sage on the stage. What I like, and I think this is a little cheesy, but I do like this, is I heard someone refer to us as guides on the side. Instead of sages on the stage, guide on the side, which essentially is that giving the power. It's not about me. The end result shouldn't be, did Phil have a great day? Like that's a bad end of the program, but I've got them to connect. I've then handed over stuff to them. So I've maybe given them prompts or discussions, let them figure out, cultivate what their needs are and all that kind of stuff. And then we talk about who in the group are the leaders, who steps up and represents and leads. And we have to be able to give them the empowerment, give them the choice. In adventure education, there's a term called challenge by choice. The essential meaning is that I allow people to choose their own level of challenge when it comes to, if we were talking about a ropes course, climbing really high or going on the zip or all that kind of stuff. But it also represents to who wants to speak up and who wants to take what roles on. But I think that empowerment is really crucial if you want to have leaders, rather than you picking and assigning people. I really dislike, I've seen this a lot in meetings where people are assigned who's going to introduce what, or you're going to say this next, or I'm going to pick names. You're looking across the grid or Zoom and say, okay, you're going to, Phil, I need you to say this start point. You haven't really empowered. You've just told someone to do something. So you want to give them the opportunity to empower themselves. And there has to be some sort of choice there. So we have that connection, we have the empowerment, and then the end point is leadership. That's sort of like the result. If we get to a point where we've done those first two really, really well, then we can have a leader who's really, really well in charge of their role. And the other thing I would say on leadership in general is that I think that they're either it's society based or whatever. I think that we have misrepresented what the word leadership should mean. I think that externally people might hear the word leader and assume it's the person on top, the person doing all the ordering around and all that kind of stuff. I think that, at least this is my stance and also High Five stance, that every single person has leadership quality, has the ability to stand up and be a leader. And it doesn't mean the person making decisions. There's this, it was a video going around for a while, and it was this notion of the second leader, which I really, really like this notion. The video showed like a dance party or a festival or something, a big field, like a Glastonbury, if people are aware of what that is. And there was music in the background, and there was just someone who obviously had too much to drink, but they were just dancing in the middle, like on their own. And you could hear the chatter, and there was someone filming it, and there was a lot of laughter, like everyone laughing at this person in the middle. And then someone else joined in because they empathized in some way. They felt this person was vulnerable and they wanted to join in and support them. They joined in. As soon as that second leader, as soon as that second person went over and did it, more people joined, and it became a big celebration dance. And so I think of that in terms of leadership, not just being that person who speaks out, but also those people who support everyone else. So as an example, if you're working with a group and someone speaks out against an injustice they're experiencing, that puts them in a vulnerable position. Others might look at that and go, oh, why did they just say that? That's embarrassing. Don't say it. But all it's going to take is one other person to step in, and that creates that little bit of movement, little bit of validation on the concept. And that second person is what I see as good leadership, has demonstrated empathy, understanding for what's going on, realized there was a need for them to step up and support, and they stepped up to support somebody else. They didn't do it for their own actions. They did it for somebody else. And I do a workshop called The Power of Play. And in this, I talk about the science and the neuroscience, neurochemicals in play. And there are essentially four neurochemicals that are key in when you're experiencing playing with a group, and they make you feel joy. There's endorphins, there's dopamine, there's serotonin, there's oxytocin. Well, the one I focus on is serotonin. I refer to it as the leadership chemical. And what happens is when you see someone else do a good deed, you get a boost of serotonin. The person that did the good deed gets the boost, but anyone who witnessed the good deed also gets the boost. So when you see someone like trip and fall or do something embarrassing, when you see someone go and help them, even if it's not you that helped, you get that boost of serotonin. And I think to tie it back into soccer, that's why people in all sports cheer on teams. When you see your team do well, you get excited. That's all serotonin. That's a boost of this serotonin kicking off all around the stadium. And that's why you hug strangers when you win and you have these elated experiences. And then you are more likely to want to do it again. It's highly addictive, highly repeatable. So um, that went off a tangent. I apologize, but that's what I think of, like those different leadership skills. And I think that's where I tie it back to that connection and power leadership piece. It's about where do you step up and how do you empower people to be able to step up?
Yeah, and again, this podcast is called How Soccer Explains Leadership. So I'm just going to say, like right now, if you play soccer, or if you've coached, or if you've been a fan, that when a team is playing and the fans are behind them and cheering them on, or even if they're booing them and throwing stuff at them, that's motivating them. Mm-hmm. Right. And so you see it now with these teams. The first few games these teams were playing, and still really to today, there's a lot of flat play going on, especially I think it's home field disadvantage now.
Oh, very much.
You look at Man U as an example. They couldn't win at home first few games of the year. The away form was phenomenal, but at home they'd lose almost every game or tie to teams they should be winning, and they'd lose. Why? Well, I mean, and I've said this before in this, if you're listening, anybody related to Manchester United, get the little part that Matt buzzed. I don't care who said it. Football is nothing without fans. Don't have that in the Stretford Inn right behind the goal, because they're reminded every time that their fans in the Stretford Inn aren't cheering them on to score that goal. So that is actually causing the opposite effect, where they're not pumped up, they're actually bummed out, and it's going to cause them to, so they have to come with even extra boost within to be able to do that. Now, I'm not saying that's why their home form was bad, but it may have something to do with it.
Yeah. They refer to the fans as the 12th player on the field, right? Like it's an essential core component of the field. And without those people, you don't have that boost. And yeah, absolutely. You don't have that drive to succeed. I think there was a study on, you see this a lot in track and field. When you got like the long jumpers and the triple jumpers, they do like, they get the clapping going with the crowd. Now that's why people assume sometimes that's rhythm based. That helps them get on rhythm. Like there's a rhythm to it. These people have practiced. They're trained athletes. They know how to run and land on the right board at the same time. But the point of it is, when they have those people, they often get personal best. That's why when you see these things, they're like, how are the kids constantly getting personal bests at these world championships? Well, it's because when they train, they can't get there. Right, and then they have the crowd and suddenly they get there. So it's the same thing in soccer. When you lose that connection to having people cheer you, then you don't have the drive and the desire, and who cares? No one's watching. And they forget sometimes the cameras are on them,
And put that into a business setting, put that into a nonprofit setting, put that into your family, put that into your marriage, right? You want to get the best out of each other, and courage, right? As we say in our house, choose joy, right? When you choose joy, it not only helps you, it helps the whole family. When you have that gratitude, the idea of, just think of 3 things and write them down of every day that you're grateful for. Proven studies on all those things. But as you said, it also helps everyone around you. Right. And I love that guide on the side concept, because as we talked about earlier, that gardener idea, that cultivating the environment, if that's what you're really looking to do, think about that. How many gardeners do you know? But how many gardens have you seen that are like, that is beautiful? As a coach, as a leader, you want to be that person that they're looking at your organization, whether it's a soccer team or a nonprofit, and they're saying, that's some amazing work going on out there. That's an amazing team going on. And you as the coach may or may not be known, I mean, you know the big name managers, but you don't know a lot of these little smaller managers who are doing pretty amazing things with teams that have, you know, less than. I mean, how many people would know Bielsa if the Amazon Prime wasn't? You know, a lot of soccer fans will, but you wouldn't know. You wouldn't have that knowledge if the or the not all or nothing, but the Take Us Home didn't
Mm.
have it. So those are things that I look at and go, leaders, if you're in it for yourself and your image and your glory, I hesitate to call you a leader. You're just a guy who wants to do stuff for you. But
Mhm.
if you're there to really build others up, to really be that servant leader, which I think we have such a leadership void, and we call so many things leaders. When you call everything a leader, it's kind of ceases to be a leader, ceases to mean something.
Yep.
I love what you said to you, and I say it all the time. Everybody is leading someone.
Mhm.
When you see yourself as a leader, you will handle yourselves differently. You will just really carry yourselves differently, and hopefully you will see it as that servant leadership. Some people do it easier than others. So anyway, those are just, you know, I love the tangents. They weren't really tangents. They're all absolutely related to this. And it's what I love about, you know, doing what we're doing. I mean, what you're doing, what we're talking about here. It's why I love coaching, to be able to, I mean, what should bring you the most joy as a coach is to seeing one of your players, or as a leader is to see one of your employees or see one of the people in your organization just hitting it out of the park and flourishing at that next level, that, you know, really the environment and training up everyone to be seeking to build each other up to be the best they can be. I mean, that's what makes weak link sports. That was what makes great teams in weak link sports.
Yeah. And you see it in teams where the players either they stay at the same club because they're invested in the coach and they have that feeling, or sometimes they do move on. And then you hear the players talk about their previous coach in great ways, or you hear the coach talk about how proud they are of that player that moved to a bigger club. You know,
Mhm.
going back to my town, Ipswich, we have a great academy. So there are a great number of players that have come through the younger youth academy, have played for Ipswich, but Ipswich is a lower league team. You're not gonna It's not a career ending
Right.
location. And so Tyrone Mings who plays for Aston Villa,
Mhm.
he grew up in the academy. So what's nice for me is I have a small investment in watching and cheering for Aston Villa only because of the player that's there, because I know he's a homegrown player from the town I'm from, and he wasn't gonna. He had so much talent. We knew he would be Premier League. He's not going to stay with us, but you'll still have the coach talk about him in great ways, or he'll reference his time at Ipswich as a being a really powerful thing. You don't want to keep hold of these people. If you're a leader, you want them to flourish and grow. We can all probably think of people who we've worked for who trained us so that we would leave. The it's not always great for the organization, but for an individual, that does feel really gratifying that they've sent you on professional development. They've paid for you to do these things and do these courses that might not be particularly related to the work you're doing, but they know that it's all designed to cultivate. And actually, I found in my own personal experience that when your leaders do that, you're actually less likely to leave. I was I had a lot of professional development paid for when I worked for the YMCA. When I was at this camp as a YMCA program, and YMCA is a fantastic organization for really cultivating its staff, and from my opinion, and they would send me to trainings, pay my way to go conferences and all that kind of stuff. But because they had invested in me, I wasn't going to be like, great, thanks for spending all this money on you. Peace, I'm out. Like I actually stuck around for probably 3-4 years longer than I necessarily needed to because of a devotion to them, because they devoted themselves to me. So I think that you see that also in soccer teams. You see the players that stay because of the coach, even though they've got tons of offers on the table to go to XYZ. Oh, Real Madrid wants this player or whatever. They stick because they're invested in the team and the coaching staff. And it's less about moving forward and going up. Going to Leeds would be Phillips, who
Yep.
plays for Leeds. When they were in the championship, he got so many Premier League offers because he's young. He's being tapped for England, like lots of potential, but he's stuck with Leeds. There's a reason why he did that, right? That it's not just my friends. And if you watch that Take Me Home documentary, you see actually his grandmother and stuff, and like his family are very devoted to that community. Talks about that community driven stuff again, and the decision was obvious to him. I could earn triple, quadruple what I'm earning right now, or I could stay at the place that I have passion and really want to cultivate me. And now look where they are. Now they're playing in the Premier League, and now he's playing for England. So he
Yeah,
got what he wanted, but he stuck to his guns and stayed exactly where he was, but mainly because of the leadership around him.
that's right. Oh man, we could talk a
Yeah.
lot longer about this, but we do have to wrap it up and to bring us home. I mean,
Yeah.
Leeds did get home, and we will get home on this podcast too. So, but the last couple questions we ask our guests, and you've been prepped on it, but how have you used the lessons you've learned directly from soccer in your relationships and other areas of life outside the football pitch, in your marriage, in your parenting? Um, what have you used directly from the game? Like we say, retaliator gets the red, that type idea. What have you learned?
Well, I'm fortunate in that my daughter is already somewhat a bit of a fan. She's 5, but she knows that Dad watches soccer on the weekends, so it's become a community part of feel to it. This is a bit of a I know you wouldn't like this. I'm not a big fan of this either. My mum was sending a Ipswich Town little toddler jersey, and she sent it, but then there was like a sale going on somewhere or some little drive, and there were like extra jerseys, but from random teams. Right. So she threw this other jersey in. Now, my daughter, who's 5, doesn't have less necessarily understanding which one's more important than other, but knew which one she liked the look of more. And now she wears almost every day an Arsenal jersey.
Oh man.
I know, because of the design of their away kit it's kind of like a bluish greenish kind of like, it looks cooler than the
Sure.
straight blue of Ipswich Town. So she'll wear that all the time. But I would say that, the idea of one thing that I always used, and I know you coach also, was don't be a glory hunter. Don't be a ball hog. Like these kind of things. And I think that that's an essential part of the team aspect of soccer anyway. So she started playing around. We kick the ball to each other, but I'm really in trying to reinforce the idea of passing it. Right, we're practicing passing the ball because you can hold the ball yourself. You can try to go to score, but the best goals, and I can say that from watching like the strategies of the game, the best goals you ever see are the ones that intricate pass play, and it's the unselfishness of the play. That's always exciting. So just in very basic terms with my daughter, I've been encouraging the idea of passing, and I think that that's translated into the ability for her to share. And when she's playing with friends and whatever sport and what she's playing with, there's a passing of it. Don't be a hog. Don't be a glory. It's not all about you. It's about that team. So other than the fact that she wears an Arsenal jersey around the house, which is like, not that I don't have anything hatred around them. I'm just like, she has an Ipswich one sitting there. Like, stick on the one that's like from our team, please. I'm fed up with taking the photos of her outside with the Arsenal jersey. People will get the wrong impression.
Yeah, you're a better son than I. If my mom would have done that, I probably would have taken it to Goodwill and just dropped it off before my daughter had a chance to
Well, the thing is, like, she never told me she was sending the thing. It's like opened up the package. I knew there was a jersey. There were 2 in there, and I called her and said, "Why did you stick an Arsenal one? Well, it was free." And I was like, "I don't care if it's free.
It's costing me my mental anguish,
Yeah, this is not free. Exactly.
buddy.
Damage to my soul."
That's such a great lesson. I mean, that idea of, passing to the assist, the helping others, the sharing, the serving, right? I mean, that's something, the joke in our family, it's not really a joke. He was 7 at the time. He was picking his number for his team. And he said, "Hey Dad, what's," because he's, as I said, it took me 5 kids to have my pure striker. And so he says, what's the number I get if I don't have to pass? And I said, well, there's no number but the 9. I mean, if it's the 9, if there's one, then that would be it. But the thing is, though, in all seriousness, now, what do I do? Of course, as a dad who's a coach and who understands life lessons and what we can do to teach him, what am I praising more in any practice, in any game, is that assist, right? I mean, yeah, I know he can score. He's got a great shot and whatever. And that's great. Don't get me wrong. But if he has he's threading a pass, or he's going and has a great cross, or if he has a shot, but his teammate has a better one, what a great life lesson there, to say the assist is just as important, and sometimes more important, than the tap in goal, right? Creating, passing, like you were saying, those threading those needles. I mean, you're seeing a lot of the Barcelona goals that comes to mind for good
Yeah.
reason. It's just boom, 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 and then just it's a tap in or pass in the
And
corner.
you've got two players playing for Tottenham right now. I know they play for Jose, but like
Yeah,
you've got Kane and Son who are like a dynamic duo right now, and it's because they're constantly setting each other up.
right.
Like Kane has more assists than anyone else in the league at the moment, and so I've actually noticed. I don't know if they've always done this, but I've started noticing even when you look on stats on like whatever app you're looking at, they often now always tell assists as much as goals, which I think is I don't know if it was always the case, but I like seeing like how many assists people get. It's always like now in the stats, but
Yeah,
it's glorified more the fact that someone set someone up as much as someone scoring, and sometimes even the man of the match award goes to the person that gave the assist instead of the goal scorer. And I'm like, wow, see, I like that. And I
yeah.
think that those, consistent lesson there.
Well, like you said, I mean, it's rare that you see a upper corner shot. I mean, yeah, there are those that are amazing that come out of nowhere off a deflection or off the defender, or a bad pass, or, Rooney's midfield goal or whatever, like you see those. But for the most part, the goals are garbage goals. They're tap ins, they're passes into the corner. They're the result of a great pass that just set them up on a table on a platter. So yeah, no, I love that. Love that lesson. Last question. As we wrap it up, what have you read, watched, or listened to recently that has impacted your thinking on how soccer explains life and leadership?
Yeah, I wrote down a few things, but the first thing that really pops into my head, it's a different sport, but I know that we've talked about this before, was Legacy by James Kerr, which talks about the New Zealand All Blacks.
Mm-hmm.
They have this phrase, which I think is essentially essential for everyone, is this notion of sweeping the sheds. Now they call their locker room the sheds. We talked about like selflessness and community and all those kind of things that we've already talked about. But in that, this team wins the Rugby World Cup, biggest thing you could win. And the first thing they do is send them straight down to their shed, and they're asked to do chores, clean up, help clean the locker and put all their laundry away. And then they go up and celebrate. So the service piece
Mm-hmm.
and serving the community is before the glory that they're going to get. And once they've done that, then they get to then have that glory moment. But I think that those are like essential skills, and I think they tie into what we've also already talked about, relationship to soccer with that. Another couple of books that like are somewhat not related to soccer, but I think are really important in the stuff that I've been doing around leadership. One is The Power of Moments by the Heath brothers, Danton and Chip Heath.
Mm-hmm.
Just talking about how can you create those small moments. And I think that that's what we reference when your leader comes and checks in and says, how are you doing today? Just those small check-in moments, they stick in people's head more than other stuff. So they're powerful moments that create a very tangible memory that can tie you back to whatever. So that's a great book. And then the other one is The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker, talking about how people collect and how they gather and the way that they work in communities. Something that's referred to, which I've been really like a bit on a tear with trying to think of, is the term of toxic positivity. And this idea that, and I don't like necessarily the word toxic because it puts on like that positivity is bad, but the notion is that rather than just focusing on all the things that are good, we also need to understand what we also need to work on. And so when you're always talking about everything's awesome, then that creates this false sense of security that then you can't bring up the things that aren't awesome. And so I think about that when you see coaches. It was a perfect one, and this is another Man United reference. But Solskjaer, the last game, 0-0 against Liverpool, and they asked him how he thought his team did, and that he got a point out of it and their top and everything. He said, no, I didn't think we played very well. What a difference that was. Then you go back 3 months when he was talking and constantly talking about the guys are playing really well, they're trying really hard, and you knew it wasn't real. People get it when it's not there. So that owning up and not having everything being positive is actually positive.
Mm-hmm.
One last reference, there was it was The Social Dilemma Netflix documentary, but there was a phrase at the end, and I like this. The critic is the truest optimist, because the critic actually wants there to be improvement.
Yeah.
You don't criticize stuff necessarily just to say it's bad. You're critiquing stuff because you want things to get better, because you are you're passionate about it. You've got some heart in it. You've got some skin in the game. So the
Yep.
critic is the truest optimist. But
No,
lots of
that's
rambling.
good. I mean, how many times have you heard that, hate is not the opposite of love. Apathy is the opposite of love, right? I mean, if you don't care, that's the worst thing. But if you're critical of something, it means you actually care about it. You want it to be better. I mean, not everybody, but a good chunk of the time. But you look at Jurgen Klopp. I mean, he's probably the apex of a great manager, as hard as that is for me to say as a United fan. But right now, it's hard to say there's a better manager out there as far as the culture, that development that we're talking about, as far as that not being that continually toxic positivity guy, but being the guy who's building up his players and doing what he needs to do to cultivate that environment. From what I've heard, I'm obviously not over there in Liverpool, but from what I've heard about the guy, that's just exactly what I see out of him. The other thing, if you've listened, folks, to every episode, you know that Graham Roxburgh, it was part of season 1, but he talked about legacy in depth, and such a great book. If you haven't picked it up, pick it up. If you haven't listened to that episode, go back and listen to it. He goes into that Sweep the Sheds, which I absolutely love a lot of that book. Also love just, as you talked about, the connection of the team. I don't know that anyone does it better than them, and with the Haku before every rugby match, nothing that I've seen compares to that. Right. So anyway, Phil, thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for, your example. As you said, be the example. Thank you for the example. I know you've taught me just in the little bit we've had in our relationship. I look forward to the day we can meet in person. Maybe I can come and do one of your experiential learning experiences with my family or with an organization.
Yeah, we've got a spring calendar has got virtual offerings. So if anyone wants to jump in and see us in virtual, anyone can come to those.
Yeah. On that note, what is the website? How do people get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
Yeah. So you can go to high5, the number 5. So HIGH, high as in opposite of low, 5adventure.org. And then on our website, you'll find all the trainings and stuff like that. Once again, Vertical Playpen, just search that in any way you listen to podcasts. And then we're also on Instagram at Vertical Playpen. So other ways you can find, and when you go on the website, you can always just track me down. And if you want to, I'm sure, Phil, you can put somewhere in the description my email, but anyone's feel free to email and contact us. We always answer our phones and happy to answer more questions.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Phil. Very much appreciate you. Very much appreciate all that you're doing. Folks out there, as you know, you can reach us at howsoccerexplainsleadership.com. You can find out all the information you need to about us there. Thanks again for being a part of this show. I do hope that you take everything that you're learning from this show, everything that you're learning from the resources that we're providing for you, and you're using it to help yourself be a better leader, to help you to cultivate that environment that we talked about here today that will help your players, your employees, your family to flourish better and better each and every day. Thanks a lot. Have a great week.